This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Here's workshop block 2, I believe, from Erica Pope. She was initiated into the Theta Theta chapter of Tau Beta Sigma from Henderson State University on October 25th, 1999. As an active member of the organization, she served in various leadership roles, including chapter vice president and chapter president, as well as vice president of colonization and membership for the Southwest District from 2005 to 2006. She was on the show band of Arkansas drum line, where she was on the cymbal line, the bass line, and the snare line, in which she is proud to say she is one of the only few female snare players in the history of the show band. She also was a member of the HSU concert and symphonic bands and played auxiliary percussion for the New Fusion Project, which is HSU's jazz fusion ensemble. Upon graduating from Henderson in 2005, she earned a bachelor's of arts degree in mass media with a focus in radio, television, broadcasting, and a minor in music. Throughout the years, she has continued to serve Tau Beta Sigma in various capacities, such as workshop presenting, advising committees, serving as a colony advisor installing officer, and from 2009 to 2015, served as the district counselor for the Southwest District of Tau Beta Sigma. She is a life member of both Tau Beta Sigma in 2007 and Kappa Kappa Psi in 2016, and also holds honorary memberships in a variety of local chapters in both organizations. In her spare time, she likes running, road trips, watching movies, reading novels, and rocking out on the drums with her party band, the Big Damn Horns. Erica currently lives in Memphis, Tennessee, and works for the Department of Music at Rhodes College as the Music Arts Coordinator. She is presenting a workshop called The Walking Lead, Assembling the Group for Chapter Roles, and the description is, oh no, the unthinkable has happened. A zombie apocalypse has occurred and hordes of the undead now dominate the planet. But by some miracle and a boatload of fortitude and courage, college band music is what has proven to best calm the appetite of the living dead. This means that Tau Beta Sigma must live to serve on for days to come. Chapter survival may mean escaping all of civilization, finding an uninhabited corner of the university band hall, and rebuilding your chapter leadership from scrap. Are zombie attacks improbable? Maybe. Is the need to choose suitably prepared leaders to lead during the good and bad times necessary? Always. This workshop will take you through the process of assembling the best people to take lead on chapter work, whether it be identifying future chapter officers, committee chairpersons, or maybe the best chapter members to take on the undead during any future zombie encounters.
Thank you so much, Brian,
Welcome.
for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you this afternoon. For some of us, I'm actually in Maryland, so this is not, I live in Memphis, so I am an hour ahead than I normally would be. So brain's in one time zone, body is in another. And so morning for my friends back home. So what this particular workshop, as Brian said, is hopefully to give you some ideas on how to select your next leaders, also to figure out what your leadership style is. And I used to kind of play on words, which first of all, we will talk a little bit, we'll have some zombie talk today, but we also really want to talk from the standpoint of how do we avoid what I like to call zombie leadership, moving forward and figuring out how to select the best people for both your district level too, and your chapter level. So how can you take some tactics and really put in the work to select really, really good people to be your next leaders, or for you to be the next leader and be suitably prepared. So we're gonna have some fun this afternoon, I hope. And stick with me. I also want to hear from some of you. And so there may be times where I post some questions, and I would love to hear from the group, what your thoughts are. So, and Brian is going to drive the car for me. So Brian, next slide. As Brian mentioned, my name is Erica Pope. I'm currently serving as your national president, and I'm from the Theta Theta chapter from Henderson State University. Now, one disclaimer, next slide. The ideas that we're going to share today are only the beginning. So making sure that you put these things into action is going to be on each of you. But don't be afraid to reach out to us or me afterwards, because we're great sounding boards on the national leadership team to really help you develop what you want to do as leaders and who you want to put in the seats on the bus, as it were. So next slide. the fun that we're having, or what the aspect of the approach that I want to take here is zombie leadership or actual invasion combat tactics. And there is an actual book called The Zombie Survival Guide. It is by Max Brooks. It is hilarious. I don't know if any of you have read it, but I have, and it's so funny because it has like a serious spin to it, but then when you really get down and start reading into it, it's actually quite ridiculous. If there were actual zombie attacks, here's how you would approach those things. And so as I was reading this book for fun, I also had a boss. In my former life, I actually used to manage an 18-screen movie theater for about 5 years in my occupation. And one of my bosses was really into zombies, and he did a presentation like this, a leadership building presentation for our staff there at the theater. And so there were a lot of good things in there that I enjoyed, and I thought, this is very applicable. Some of the approaches to if there were ever a zombie apocalypse that could be, applicable to what we do in Tau Beta Sigma in terms of bouncing back. We all technically are kind of bouncing back from a world thing that, some probably felt was very zombie-like in the way of the pandemic. And so how do you recover from that? But also specifically, like just in general, in a normal year, how do you select the best people? And so playfully, I kind of read through the book and I thought, okay, if choosing your leaders were like being in a worst case scenario, there are several different things in the book that they talk about. So there's on the defense. So it's basically finding a place, creating a place, locking the door, throwing away the key because you're trying to barricade yourself from the craziness outside. I think we all did that a lot over the last 2 years. Then there's on the run, and I say, run, Forrest, run. So it's basically you're always moving. You're moving from place to place. And for those of you who have watched, anything that pertains to zombie lore, which pause, anybody have some favorites, like their hot take on what their favorite like zombie flick or pop culture thing is? Feel free to either say them. Wait, what was that? Which one?
Zombieland. I think that's what it is.
Oh, yes. Have you seen the second one? The second one is great too.
Yeah, and it's another one where the zombies end up like getting fillings and stuff. I can't remember. I think it's Warm Bodies or something. That was good too.
I think they're right. Yeah. Any other hot takes? Anybody have a favorite part of the zombie pulp culture that they want to put on our radar? It's okay if you don't. Don't worry. We'll give you a read watch list after this. So on the run, basically, you're always going from place to place, trying to get resources. So whether that be food, water, the basic things that you need to continue to stay alive, and resources, of course, in this situation, part of being on the run also may be things to help protect yourself. So that leads to being on the attack. So I use the phrase, they may take our land, but they'll never take our freedom, which is a completely different movie and genre. But it's the same aspect of basically you're preparing yourself. So whether that's, you are working out to make sure that you're physically fit, and you are collecting, any weapons that you can to kind of help protect yourself from things. And then there's just starting over. And that means that you're out with the old, in with the new. And that's actually the approach that I think sometimes when it comes to choosing your leaders that we really need to take. And so we're going to kind of stick around with that and all the ways in which you would, the things that you can put into place so that you can help, starting over. Because this happens, especially if your chapter has a huge overturn rate and members graduating. We've seen whole chapters who had a class of 10 membership candidates, but then they had 10 active members, and the 10 active members all graduated the next spring, and then all 10 of those new members, I was like, yep. And so the whole next, group of people are all of a sudden, it's like, congratulations, you're in Tau Beta Sigma, now you get to be the president, and often has happened. And so how do we help you prepare for that? So with that in mind, next slide, I wanted to, now in each of these sections of the book, they actually have like the playful, like things that you need to do in terms of preparing. And so this list actually had 15, but I really narrowed it down to the 10. And number 1 is the one we're going to focus on the most. But if you wanted to put this into like a real life situation, so list your gear, be ready to shop. So in this case, it's making sure that your chapter has what it needs to be successful, whether that be in actual materials or whether that be in the leaders in which you need. Plans B, C, D, and E. So we always have plan A, and we sometimes get wrapped up in A and don't realize that you always need to have at least 4, but maybe, I would say at least 1, but have several plans, on what you're going to do. So if you have 10, an example would be if you have 10 active members, but you have, 15 offices, what do you probably need to do? Either get rid of some of those offices or consolidate, because you don't necessarily need that many offices to do the work of the organization. Plan your routes. So in the zombie apocalypse, you got to make sure that you know where you're going, and where the safest routes are. In this case, you're looking to figure out what is the best plan in terms of how do we select our leaders. Become an expert. So that's, doing your research on various aspects of things. As a chapter, looking into ways in which you can take leadership, seminars. A lot of your universities probably have that. We offer them as well. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you're here at these learning how to do some of these things and get ready for your school year, in that regard. So becoming an expert in some way on how to formulate elections, how to select the best people, and make sure that what you are expecting or what the expectations are within those roles, that everybody has an understanding in what that should be. Know your location. So this one can go in a number of ways, but in this instance, talking through the lens of the organization and specifically through the leadership aspect of things. Knowing your location, of course, is knowing where, for example, just the very simple thing of where your chapter meetings are going to take place. And sometimes even the when as well is important. So, if you constantly are seeing that, your chapter meetings are having to take place in various places based on when they're available and not necessarily on the time, work really hard as a chapter to figure out how to get that into something that is standardized, where we know we're going to meet this day every week in this location, and keeping that in mind. To the ends of the earth. So in selecting your leaders and selecting, the operation of your chapter, it's really important that you, do what you can and do all that you can as a chapter and do it together. And to the ends of the earth is very dire, but what we mean by that, and it kind of fits into the next one of remaining vigilant, is just keep pushing forward with the work that you're trying to do, and not, not letting the hiccups in the road that happen keep you from being able to do the work of your chapter and of the national organization. When you are regrouping and when you are restarting, you want to wean yourself off of luxury items. So think about all the things your chapter and your band actually need and prioritize those things so that you're able to accomplish something. And then if it gets to a point where you've accomplished those things and you want to look at a larger picture or bigger picture situation, then do that. And then number 2 is study, and that kind of fits into become an expert. So again, making sure that as an organization, you are plugging into things and understanding, from the national standpoint, what are the expectations for chapters to stay in good standing? What do, within the roles, the significant roles in the chapter, what are the things that are important and to each role? And then finally, the most important thing, and the thing that we're going to focus on most is, we've talked about all the things that you need to do to regroup and restart in a zombie apocalypse or after a pandemic, a real life situation is, next slide, assemble a group, and that's the important part. And so this part is putting the important people, or putting the right people and the best people in the appropriate roles. So one thing that you'll want to understand is that when you are assembling a group, as we talked about, there are the things that can happen that that really do affect the leaders of your organization. And so with that in mind, the kid hit the fan. So what to do when essentially it hits the fan. And so here are some of the it's that could affect your chapter leadership. So your chapter size shrinks. We talked a little bit about that. Massive overturn of old members to new members, changes in band leadership. And what are some of the other things that you have seen that have affected your leadership? And so here's where I would love to hear from some of you, if you want to raise your hand or unmute, and tell us about some of the things that have affected your leadership, or some of the values within your organizations, or I should say the components that have made it hard, or have made it harder for your leadership. So yeah, I will open up the floor for some input on that.
I'll go. I know for us, it was like our chapter, they had graduated, but right before they graduated, they brought a line in and then left. And then it was like they had to figure out how to, how things went, considering, those older girls had left and started their life. I mean, they helped a little bit, but then there's also, we had to figure out what didn't work. So you also got to figure out what you got to change to make it work in the future. But as far as them not being there when the older girls was there, they didn't know what didn't work. So they was going with their ideas, and then later on found out it didn't work. So now you got to change it a little bit to figure it out. So that was our kind of problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like we talked about that overturn, in terms of people leaving and not really doing a good job of transitioning. So we've seen that with a lot of our different, chapters, especially with our newer members, especially over these last 2 years, where, if you were operating in a virtual sense and then you didn't, you're transitioning back to an in-person setting. I feel like we've probably seen that more so than anything else. And so I think those are two really good examples. What are some other examples of challenges facing, or that you found that faced as either new leaders or leaders outgoing within your chapter? Did anyone else have a hot take in that regard?
Yeah.
Maybe just
go ahead.
I already went. You would go before me.
Okay. I was gonna say that kind of everything that you mentioned before kind of happened to our chapter. We got really small right before the pandemic, down to like 2 members who were trying to really just like salvage the chapter. But in that, when they recruited, they were really just like, we need to get numbers however we can. And so it didn't really matter whether someone really had a heart for service when they joined in, so that there was a lot of conflict at first, with some people dropping out and some people having problems with wanting to have leadership positions but not necessarily showing like a real interest in what that position would hold. And so it was kind of interesting trying to navigate how to put like effective leaders in the right positions, and also like kind of seeing which positions were essential to our operations.
I'm so glad you said all of that, because we're going to touch on all of those things today. So thank you, Hope, for sharing that. That is wonderful. I was like, do you even need me? I'm going to go. You can teach the rest of this workshop. Good. So that means you're going to have really good answers or good responses to some of the questions I'll ask later. So yeah, very good. So with that in mind, yes, those are just some of the many things. But there's hope for you, I promise. We will make sure that all of your chapters are prepared when the it's hit the fan, and that kid was not having a good day because he hit that fan. So next slide. Ooh, Brian, you got next slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, it was a slow response on my end. So here are some of the ways, or some of the things to keep in mind as we are thinking about, how do we select the best people? So the first one is strategic planning. And sometimes, most of the time when you hear that phrase, a lot of people are thinking about specifically like projects and things like that. But you can actually strategic plan for what types of leadership you need within your organization and within your chapter. So long-term leadership goals, and I know a lot of that will also depend upon, like, of course, how many people you have in your chapter, but small or large, you can still strategic plan on what kind of leadership you're after and what you need specifically for the work of the organization, the work for your band program. It's extremely important, though, to cross-train. And so, when you have those members who are plugged into those leadership roles at that time, it's really important for those who maybe don't have, there's a number of avenues you can take. So let's say you have officers who are explaining the things that they're doing to those who aren't current officers, to maybe excite or ignite their interest in maybe taking on those positions. But also, we're talking about the worst case scenario, a zombie apocalypse. So let's say, in a real life setting, in a real life situation, somebody has to withdraw from school or somebody has to step back for whatever reason, the work still needs to continue. And so it's important for more people to know processes, such as our national paperwork is a big one that I think about, but also just the day-to-day operations within your chapter and within your band program, so that the work can continue. If somebody's got to tap out, you tag somebody else in. So suitably preparing all of your chapter members for leadership, even if someone holds the title, but somebody else may know how to do it and can step in if that person needs to step away. So for example, in the national leadership, I'm the national president, but Siobhan she calls herself first VP, but she's able to step into some of the things if I need to step away, and vice versa, because I've done all the other offices and have that institutional knowledge, as we like to say. I'm able to step into all of those roles. And so there's always somebody who knows what's going on. So it's important to do that within chapter as well. Identifying your leadership styles. So what type of leaders do we need, and particularly that you have, because all of you are a leader and have a leadership style in some sense. And we're actually going to talk about that in a future slide, specifically some of the most common leadership styles. And be prepared, because we're going to go through them, and then I want y'all to have a chance to think about it and tell me which ones you feel like you identify with most. Chapter gifts and talents. So what do members have to bring to the leadership table? And that's important, because I think that sometimes you'll have what they say, talent hiding in plain sight. And so it's things that people are passionate about and things that they really are into, that can be useful to the work of your chapter, but goes unutilized because for whatever reason, maybe that person is really quiet, or they're there for chapter and they're there for the work, but you don't really get to see everything about that person, and the chapter for whatever reason doesn't take time to understand that. And so you're really doing a disservice to your chapter by not letting those members who have those hidden talents or gifts be able to shine in those ways, because everybody has something that they can bring to the table, and that can be useful to the work of Tau Sigma and for your band program. But as you're working through these things, it's important to remember to be patient. And from the book, which I found was yes, it was in a funny book, but it was very, very relevant to the work that we do, is remember, no matter how desperate the situation seems, time spent thinking clearly is never going to be time wasted. And so be patient as you're working through, building your leadership back up or figuring out who the next set of leaders are going to be. I know those chapter meetings for us, I remember when I was an active member, the chapter meeting that was specifically when we were electing new officers was always the longest. And yet I felt like, because, yeah, I see shit shaking heads like, yeah, it's always the longest. But that's because I like to believe that's because we're wanting to try to select the best people to be able to take the organization to the next level and keep that legacy of greatness moving forward. So yeah, next slide. So if you have your device, your phone, and you would like to scan that, this is an article that I read that basically was about how to strategize. So, in the previous slide, we talked about strategic planning specifically for the type of leaders that you'd like to have in your chapter and like a long-term, leadership goals. And so Gallup.com had this article that was create a leadership selection strategy based on potential. And as you start reading the article, a lot of it is centered around like specifically like in the workplace, but it's very applicable to what we do in Tau Beta Sigma, especially because we are worker bees for the band. And so also the other part of that is technically we are a corporation as well. So people forget we're a business as well. And so with that in mind, one thing that the highlights from this is identify potential for bias in leadership selection criteria. That is a very, very loaded, heavy sentence, but it's true. And I think sometimes, chapter leaders are chosen with unconscious bias, and that's not anybody's fault. I think sometimes we have those moments where we're looking at the smaller picture and need to look at the larger picture of what a person can offer within a role. And so up front, your strategy should be working to identify those potential biases in leadership selection and criteria. Find leadership talent hiding in plain sight. So I just mentioned, the chapter gifts and talents is important. And then using a scientific approach to elect or elevate great leaders. And yes, there is a science to this. And as you read through this article, they give you some methods and some things to think about, again, from the standpoint of on the workplace, but, by hiring, substitute that with the word electing or elevating as you move forward. And then here's where we're going to need some feedback and input from you. So next slide. Safety in numbers, but really by numbers, I mean, here are 7 of the most common leadership styles. And in this article that is linked here, it's American Express. That is not a plug for American Express. I don't even have an American Express credit card, but it was one of the articles that I stumbled across when looking and preparing for this workshop. So 7 leadership styles and how to find your own. And so here are just some of the 7. And if you put it, I will tell you, if you Google that, there are so many different like avenues and ways in which you can characterize the ones that are listed here, but also specifically, there are some others that aren't listed here, but fit in and are very applicable as well. So the first one is Autocratic. And specifically what they do is they establish a clear vision and an end goal and how to achieve it. And one thing that this article does, it also tells you like the pros of having this kind of leaders and this kind of leadership style. And then it also tells you specifically some things to be wary of, or like buyer beware. So, be careful in that regard. So Autocratic, yes, they have a clear vision and a goal and how to achieve it. Some would think of them as being authoritarians, meaning like it's my way or the highway aspects. And so you can imagine that that's one of the buyers beware in that regard. Pace setting leaders, they push team members to run hard and fast to the finish line. They themselves are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work alongside the members that they're pushing hard and fast to the finish line. As you can imagine, some of the the cautionary tales with pace setters is that, they can often get impatient with those who are not on the same pace as them. And so where there are certain projects that a pace setting would be good, you have to be very careful as to where you plug that. And really, you have to be careful where you plug any of these leaders. And so it's important to know everyone's leadership styles and figure out where that fits into the roles within your chapter. Transformational, they're also known as visionary leaders, and they're strongly committed to organizational purpose and big picture ideals. So often I think people think of for example, in our chapters, the VP is the transformational because they're bringing in new members, and so they're committed to the organizations. Everybody's committed, but like that person is like, they're the educator. They're the person who is looking at all of the big picture and the organizational purposes and literally like imparting that onto a new group of people. And so often I think we attach that and associate that with our vice president of membership. And so, transformational, I think we all have a little bit of that in us, but they are also known as the leaders who are looking towards the future of the organization. Then there's coaching. And so coaching leaders, they view their teams as reservoirs of talent to be developed. So it's not just, I'm going to be a leader, but I'm going to make some more leaders along with us with the talent that they're bringing to the table. Very much the way that a coach coaches an athlete. So they are coaching potential in that regard. Democratic leaders. Democratic leaders are also known as participative leaders. They tend to seek and gain employees, or in this case, chapter members' input before making a decision. Obviously, when you have a democratic approach to leadership, one of the things that is or could be a challenge is that it takes longer to make decisions. And yet sometimes that's good because it means, again, it kind of goes back to the while you're thinking about things, that's not a bad thing and it's not time wasted. But some people, again, much like with the pace setter, the democratic person, there may be people who are like, come on, let's go, we're ready to go. And we're like, you got to do things in a certain amount of time. And the democratic leader is that person who wants to like do their due diligence, cover all the bases before they make a decision. Affiliative leaders, also known as facilitative leaders, they aim to put employees first. And so they are thinking about what your needs are. And that's important, a huge important part of being a leader. Again, the tough part there is that sometimes, depending, let's say you have a chapter of 75 people, you don't want anybody behind, but you then have to like, the affiliative person tries really hard to like make sure that every single person feels valued. And sometimes that can be a daunting task for any one person, but that just speaks to the nature and the heart to that person who is the affiliative leader. And then there's delegative. And delegated leaders are also known as laissez-faire leaders. And so they provide minimal or minimum of guidance when they give you a project. They're very much, here's the project. This is the end game. I don't care how you get to the end game, but this is it. And that is great. That's a positive because it allows people to think for themselves and also to achieve something. And it really kind of helps develop future leaders if it's something that is tasked to someone else and it gives them buy-in, whoever is getting the delegated task. Their role in that regard, it helps shape them as a future leader for the organization. The downside is that if you're delegating everything out and not doing anything yourselves, then it means that, what is your role? Sometimes the delegator or the person who is the delegative leader sometimes at the end of the process feels as if they were not part of the process at all. And so that can create a bit of a conflict or a power struggle if that person is not okay with someone else doing all the things and sometimes not always having time to like bring them up to speed. And so if you're that kind of leader, you have to be able to like toe the line between those two things of, yes, I'm going to be laissez-faire and let this person run point on something, but also know that how you think of things or how you view things, or if you're not, as they say, clear as kind. So if you're not very explicit with what you want the end game to be, then that can be problematic moving forward. So with those 7 in mind, hopefully you've had some time to think about it. From the group of those 7, in fact, go back a slide. Which ones do you think, or how do you think, what are the leadership styles you feel like you demonstrate as a leader within whatever role you currently hold within your chapter?
I currently feel like I kind of, depending on what the situation is, I go back and forth. Because sometimes you actually have to like put your foot down and say, this is what has to happen, and it's what we got to do. Then you have times where it's like everybody got to come in. Sorry if I sound out of breath. I'm kind of running in place to try to get my steps in. But so I kind of feel like it all depends on the situation. You can't really choose one approach to it. And then how you approach people. Because some people might need every little thing, but somebody else might have a creative idea where it's just like you would be okay with just giving them, the task at hand and giving them the go. So I think it all depends on who you're delegating it to or who you're talking to, and then the situation.
Okay, very good. So which 2 of these do you feel like, or you said you kind of bounce back and forth, so are there any 2 or 3 maybe even that you feel like are most you?
I can see Democrat, because I know I'm a peculiar person, so my ideas may be a little weird than what, the majority people might want. So I can see Democratic. And there was one more where it was like you work with the people to like your members or whatever to help delegate, because I don't want to be like that person that's like, well, she's only giving me the job, but she's not, actually helping and stuff. I would hate to hear that about myself. So that's one thing. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Anyone else want to share? And Brian, that's you as well. I know you're tech, but if you have, Hope, I see Hope. Yeah, Hope.
Yeah, I think the first one that stood out to me was transformational for sure. Last semester, I was VPM for my chapter, so I see where that definitely plays in, and that's definitely where that developed the most. And then 2 others that I think, like in that order, would kind of apply to me would be the coaching one, and then the democratic one, which I think I kind of picked up before joining TBS, like in high school and being like a drum major and like trying to figure that out too. And that's the ones that I think I kind of drift towards the most, but I definitely think that different scenarios call for different ones, and I've found myself bouncing between them as needed.
Yeah, very good. And it's then the other thing is the reason why I'm saying like, are you multiple is I would say it's probably rare that you would find anyone who's just one. So it's okay to have various leadership styles. And I think that sometimes when we ask that question, you assume you have to have one. Like it's not like your Harry Potter house or whatever you want to be, you don't have to have just one. You can have various approaches to leadership. So, yeah. Anyone else want to share? I see over in the chat. Yeah. So your top, and forgive me if I do not say your name correct, Schuler, says that my top 2 are Delegative and Democratic. I'm very aware that my opinion is only one out of many, and I try to get, yay, I did it, yay. I try to get feedback from others on things before implementing them. Also, I tend to trust my leaders to accomplish their responsibilities unless they ask for help. Absolutely, and that's important. Like I said, the important part of that is being able to hand something over to someone and step out of it. as national president, I will say that's one of the things that I try really hard, because there's so many spinning parts to the national organization and so many places where, my voice or my input is needed. And so to try to have your voice and input on everything is just not, it's not feasible. It's not possible. But being plugged into everything is. And so even if it's you're handling the business, but I'm CC'd on that email, so that if I need to go back and binge read all the 75 emails that I have in my inbox pertaining to various topics pertaining to the sorority, then I'm able to do that. And so yes, the delegative part is really, really important. So yeah, anybody else want to share theirs? I'll share mine as well, but I wanted to hear from the group first.
I can hop in. I think Ivan's going, so I'll go after Ivan.
All right.
Okay. I'd like to think I encompass most of these. Like specifically for myself and my own goals, I am very pace setting. I want to put everything in order and get it done as quick as possible so I can move on to the next thing. But like on how like I've operated in a chapter and like other leadership roles before, I would say transformational, seeing like the big picture goals and striving for those, like that kind of goes hand in hand with pace setting in my the way I'm viewing it as well as like I do enjoy getting feedback in the democratic stance. Like I know there are certain times where you do need feedback, and then there's certain times where like I'm gonna have to make a decision for something specific. And then I would like to say I harp on being affiliative the most. I am very much of, I want to make sure everybody feels appreciated, feels like they belong. And by doing that, that leads into coaching. So like coaching the leaders, coaching the other officers, coaching the members who may become officers in the future. That's how I tend to do that, is like I try to do one-on-one time, or just encourage them to do certain things. And so, yeah, I feel like that's how I can help them feel like they're important and like they belong.
Absolutely, very good. Brian.
The one thing I wanted to point out, because there are a couple that I definitely turn towards, but I think that in the moment that you're trying to use these sort of tools, it changes based on the group that you're trying to lead. And so even as we talked about when you're out with the old and with the new, something that works with a group of people might not work with the next group of people. Coming from a chapter sponsor perspective, some of my tactics were to be very hands-on because all of the sisters didn't know how to do it in person. So even though I wanted to strive to be delegative and affiliative, knowing that, I don't want to push the rules onto them and say, this is how, the national organization, we have a constitution, we need to do X, Y, and Z. But if it was too much for them, I wanted to try and spin it and see how we could get it accomplished without annoying everyone or pissing them off. And so I thought that was very interesting to see how some of these, specifically the democratic, affiliative, and the delegative, I think I strive for. Pace setting, I don't think I've used recently. But it is nice to see that there are these different styles and that each of them are definitely pros and cons in different scenarios, and that no matter what, as long as someone is grabbing from each of these at some time or another, it's still going to develop them into being a really good leader.
Absolutely. Because yes, I love that you said that it's important to, if you have multiple parts of the leadership styles, and sometimes you have to like put on a different hat based on the audience. So like what I would say to the National Council is very different than, or the hat that I would wear in the National Council is very different than what I would wear because I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. I'm a non-voting member of the Board of Trustees. But then when I approach the Tau Sigma Alumni, Executive Council, that's going to be a totally different. So those are 3 different hats alone of leadership style that I would use in each of those groups. And so sometimes within your chapter, you'll find that like it's probably more situational at that point, like what what part of your leadership styles that you use. So I would say of these 7, for me, very democratic, because though I am the face of Tau Sigma, so they tell me, I don't know, I very much value a lot of ideas to come to the best idea for the greater good of the national organization. And I think in a way I've always been that way. Like even when I was a chapter member, you know, I liked to, in those days, it was probably like sitting in our dorm room talking about like, what do you think about this and within our chapter, and then bringing that into the chapter room, you know, just sitting around playing Nintendo when we should have been studying, and thinking about, you know, what that should have been. Super Nintendo at that, you know, by that time. So there you go. And so I'm very democratic in that, and I've tried to take that into this current role. I am very delegative. In fact, this event is a prime example of that, where you know, the National Council decided we wanted to continue doing workshops like this. You know, if we've learned anything from the pandemic, is that there are multiple opportunities to connect with active students, and that's what we want to continue to do as a national organization, and never go back to the time where we only see you at like your in-person events and we never interact with you in the interim. And so that's something that I knew I was going to need to like hand over to someone else, because, you know, got all kinds of other things happening. And so being able to delegate to Leslie and say, okay, here's the ideas. She went and got some ideas from those of us on the National Council. And it's important because it really does help us, you know, succeed in all the things that we need to do by working together as a team in that regard. So very democratic, very delegative. And yes, I do try really hard to aim to put the employees first. And so, you know, in this, you know, we're all volunteers, but specifically I'm looking at like your district counselors and your chapter visitation assistants, making sure that they know that, yes, we've asked them to do a job, but we care about them first. And, you know, so that's, you know, at least 3 or 2 in 6 different 6 different districts of Tau Sigma when it comes to counselors. And then we have, you know, close to 20 CBAs nationwide. And so making sure that, you know, that's a large group of people. And so, you know, I spoke to it being kind of daunting, but it's worth it because they feel the value of being members. I hope they do. Brian's here. So like they feel the value of being members of the national leadership and the national organization. So those are, I would say, are the 3 that I try to, and yet there are some times where I really do have to, in this role, it's just natural that the transformational aspect of things is also part of the leadership style as well. So I know we're actually at 1 p.m. my time, 12 yours, and I know we have lunch coming up, but I want to do this last part. So if we could go to 2 slides, actually, get ready to assemble. And so this next thing is actually something that I'd love for you to do on your own. And feel free to, you know, we're going to be online a little bit the rest of the day. And so if you come through and want to know, I would love to know where everybody lands. And so what this is, you know, we talked about finding each, the gifts within the organization and within your chapter. And so this is just a fun, but really asks some really good questions. And specifically, you know, finding, you know, quizzes like this or polls like this and doing them as a chapter is something that I would love to see more chapters do, because again, you never know what hidden gems you're going to find. And that this could be a very good idea, as well as a good activity to do to just see what talent you have. And so I think this one takes about, it shouldn't take more than like 6 to 7 minutes to do. So it's something you could easily throw into a chapter meeting. And you can find tons of these on the online. You can just Google like whatever kind of poll that you are looking for, or whatever kind of quiz or activity that you're looking for. But this one was one that I really enjoyed, partially because how fast you could do it. And I would love to see what everyone's results are in that regard. So I'm going to open the floor for questions about selecting leaders and leadership. And then I have a couple of fun slides if anybody wants to stick around before they go to break to lunch, if you want to some more zombie talk, but also zombie talk in the aspect of like your national leadership. So I'll open the floor for questions from the group on selecting leaders for your chapter. Or approaches, anything that you're thinking about.
I have a question. So for us, our elections at the end of the year tend to come almost like just a few weeks after we've also gotten in new members. And for us, we have like our executive positions, then we have a lot of chair positions and smaller roles for people to play. And it's like interesting because I think that we recognize certain biases, but sometimes think that they're still important to consider. And it's kind of hard sometimes to figure out like what should be the primary things coming into our decision to elect someone for a specific office. So do you have any advice on how to navigate all those different factors and come down to like the basics of who should be in what position?
Yeah, so the first thing is just making sure everybody has an understanding of what the positions are, because I think that sometimes is, it's not sometimes, it is, I think the challenge that a lot of chapters have, because there's not a clear understanding of what the duties are. And so what I would recommend is like, as you're going through, like start a little bit, maybe earlier in the semester, because if I'm correct, IOTA, you usually do them in the spring. Is that correct? Do your elections, and y'all typically have spring classes too. So with that in mind, like start earlier, and maybe during chapter meetings, like showcase your offices. I think that would be important to do so that they understand, so that your new members, especially when your new members are around, because if some of them know they're going to have to like instantly become a member of the executive board right after becoming a member, that it'd be good for them to have an understanding of what they're going to do, even if it's one of like the lower spots or one of those chair positions that you just spoke of, that they're ready and they're prepared for that. So that would be my first bit of advice in that. And then, like I said, the little quiz that I've done there is fun, but it also can be very informative. And so thinking about what people's majors are, going beyond just knowing what, what they do every day and every week or however often you have your chapter meetings, that they are, you're learning more about the individual and who they are, what they're able to do, and how that could be conducive to the roles. And also just kind of time, like what does their, it's not beyond the realms to ask your candidates, to ask your officer candidates, I should say, what they feel like their next year is going to look like. So for example, one of our districts for their leadership packets for those who are running for district office, what they do is they actually have, it's not so much like their personal thing, but like with this role, this office, they have them do like a mock timeline of what they feel like they would like to do in terms of projects for the school year. And so that maybe that's an approach as well. It's just doing a lot of kind of proactive rather than reactive work of selecting the best people. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I see we have some questions. Do you have any advice on how to handle a situation where someone you've appointed as a leader isn't fulfilling their responsibilities? Absolutely. So because we are a sisterhood-based organization, I think those, heart-to-heart conversations should always be the first start of that, of, reaching out, because you never know what someone else is going through. And so I think that's an important part of that, in relation to being able to, come to a common ground. And so I think that's the first thing is having that conversation, and then seeing how maybe you can be helpful to them getting back on track. There are things that you can do with officers if you know, it gets to a point where maybe after you've had those heart-to-heart conversations or those, you know, very sisterly conversations with them, then if it needs to be elevated a little bit higher, you definitely want to get your sponsor and your director of bands, but more specifically your sponsor involved first, just because, again, there's that neutral character in the situation, hopefully. And if an improvement plan needs to be part of that, then definitely give them a chance, you know, give them enough of a chance to make it right. So that, you know, you've done your due diligence and they've done their due diligence. And so if someone is on an improvement plan, you definitely want your sponsor to be a part of those conversations so that there is an understanding of what needs to happen for them to be able to improve their performance. And put everything in writing. It's important, just because of the fact that, you know, it's important, you know, it goes back to what I just said about clear as kind. So it's like, you clearly know that here are the things that you have not been measuring up, you've not been doing, and make sure, you know, that you are able to move forward with everything that you are doing, and that the work of the organization can continue, and that this person is okay to be able to continue doing those things. Because sometimes, you know, sometimes people need an off ramp. And so sometimes you having that initial sisterly conversation can be the off ramp they need, that like, I just don't have time to devote to this anymore, you know, and you at least had that conversation with them to be able to do that. You're welcome. All right, any other questions? Oh, so I see Dejanay, your gift was laughter. I would say, has anybody else completed theirs? Feel free to share. I was told also that we can go a little bit longer today if we want to, but I will not hold you here by any stretch of the imagination. So if you got that hot, I got some pizza, I'm gonna go try to go get here. So I'm excited about it. Yeah. No matter where you are, who you are with, you can always put a smile on people's faces. You take joy from making other people laugh, and know that it's a huge part of your own happiness. Yeah, right on, being able to laugh. Okay, so we're gonna get you ready for that stand-up comedy circuit. But also, you can apply that to various roles within the organization. You know, that kind of speaks to that, you know, we were talking about the affiliative. So like the person who, you know, if you love making people laugh, it means that you care about how they feel. So I feel like that's probably speaks to that leadership style. Ivan, intellect. Okay, you've lived your life in the pursuit of knowledge, and it shows. So if ever the zombie apocalypse happens, you're going to be our steady guy and make sure that we are where we need to be, and be an expert on all the things. So, you know, how to build a water irrigation because we need to, you know, relocate, how to build a forts, and all those good things. You almost have your nose in a book, and there's nothing on this planet that doesn't pique your curiosity. Ah, yes, I'm putting you on my team. Okay. People respect and admire you, your desire for learning, and you place the highest value on those who share your passion. Nice. All right. Well, any other questions before we get to our final, what I like to say, fun slides of today?
I have one more question.
Yeah. Oh.
Sorry. So also I talked about us having some positions, and we have quite a few, but we're also pretty small still as a chapter. And so I know our current president, she kind of takes the affiliative approach where she really wants everyone to feel valued and important. And sometimes that involves in everyone should have a role, but sometimes I think it's kind of like overwhelming, and it's kind of hard to know which way's up and which way's down, because everyone is doing something, and sometimes those things clash with one another. And so it's like, who is responsible for this? And then things kind of fall through the gaps. So how do you kind of minimize positions without making anyone feel like you're coming for their role or something?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to distinguish the difference between an elected official and an appointed official. And so that's important as well, because elected officials, of course, especially the president. You know, they can appoint whoever they need in whatever role they need. But I think it's important to also have those planning meetings where you sit and you look at the larger picture of what it is. Like, look at what your end games are in terms of the projects that you are working on and how some of those things might intersect. And I think that's will be your key to that. So that, as you said, people aren't doing the same thing, or people are doing two totally different things, but it's kind of like, you know, you've seen those machines where you drop a ball and one thing has to happen for the next thing to happen for the next thing to happen. You know, that aspect of things. You know, people are doing two separate things, but if this doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. And so making sure that you see how those two things are interlocked, so that when you're planning, you can put all of those things into the appropriate order. So yeah, I think those are the things, is like having a planning meeting. And then the other thing is understanding, you know, having a clear understanding of what everyone's roles are. So that's why it goes back to like, what is the difference between being elected and what is the difference between being appointed? Appointed typically answer to someone who has been elected, you know, in that regard of whatever the project is, or if it's committee work and you have someone who's a chairperson of a committee, but they have, you know, someone on the committee, like say it's membership, and your VPM is not the chair necessarily, or they co-chair it with someone else so that you can VPM and that other person can do more of the day-to-day operational parts of the membership class, that, you know, y'all collaboratively work together to, you know, make the committee work happen. So yeah, distinguishing, it's okay to sit down and say, okay, this person is responsible for this, this person is responsible for this, and understanding that not everybody needs a title to be important. I don't know how many ways I can hammer that into to active members, is that the most important role you hold is as an active member of the organization. And so even if you don't have a title, you can still, you still have an impact, and you still have something that you can provide to the organization and to the long-term success of the chapter. So yeah, but I understand where you're coming over, like, everybody needs to feel valued. Well, they feel valued if you give them an assignment and they complete the assignment, or that you let them be a part of the work that you're doing. Yeah, like that's really important. I love being part of projects where people are like, I really need help with this. Here's, you know, here's a project I'm working on. I could really use your expertise on this project. Please help me with this work so we can get it done.
Thank you.
These are great questions. Oh, wow. Any other questions for me or in general? All right. Seeing none, I will go to my final 3 slides here. So should we have this zombie survival pro tip? The assembling the group is the important part, because you want everybody who has a thing. So like if you're assembling your zombies survival group, you want to make sure somebody's good with medical, somebody's good with reading maps, because let's face it, all of your cell phones are going to go down. And so if that were the case, then just remember we need someone who can get us from point A to point B across the country. If you've seen Zombieland, you know how important that is. Someone who can, you know, do various things. So keep in mind, should the thing ever happen, your success will be based directly on your ability to shoot accurately and your ability to swing a melee weapon. Most other skills will probably be secondary to this. So grab whatever weapons that are available to you, whether that be crowbars or band hall door handles, they're acceptable choices. But just about anything you can swing. And just remember that you don't have to be the fastest, you just can't be the slowest. Cardio! Next slide. By using that logic, however, here's where your national leaders, or at least your national council members, are on the spectrum. So Erica, I just may push you in the way so that I can get away. Siobhan, despite being from Texas, is a bad shot, so she wastes a lot of ammo. Dr. Webb would remind the survival group that clubs don't need to be reloaded, meaning grab something that, yeah, rather than shoot, grab something you can swing. Leslie doesn't believe in zombies, but would try to reason with one and make a deal. And Allison swears that unicorn tears are a viable cure and would suggest harvesting them so as soon as possible after you're able to find the unicorn. So real life things though, as you were thinking about resources that you can access for anything operational, but specifically about when you're thinking about your leaders, your chapter operations guidebook. It's something that we try to keep updated. And so as we make new updates, we let you know when we've made an update. TBS National Programs Guide. So if you're thinking about who your Focus on 5 liaison should be, or if your special projects person is your liaison, they want to get acclimated with that. If you're not sure what all that role entails, you as a person, as a voting member of your chapter, should maybe thumb through these things to get an idea that, of what the role might consist of. And then having access to our national curriculum overture, which there's a special secret way to get to it, but once you know, it's accessible to everyone. And so being acclimated with what the expectations of being your chapter's first VP or membership educator is. And are still perfectly human resources for now. Feel free to reach out to your chapter sponsors as you're thinking about, what role and what direction you want to go with your leadership. Last night, I loved what Derek Mills was saying. He has a chapter sponsor takes it upon himself to meet with candidates, with officer candidates. I'm so glad he said that in the lead up to this, because having them plugged into who the leaders are is important. Your district counselors are great sounding boards. TBS chapter visitation assistants, as you're visiting with them. If that's a workshop you want them to host about, selecting leaders or what leadership expectations are within each role, or give some feedback on what approaches that leaders can, then that's something that they can present during your visits. And then, of course, we, the National Council, are here to field any operational questions that you may have about anything specifically pertaining to, the selection of leaders, whether on the district or the national level, or I should say district or chapter level, really national as well, because you are the voting population for our national officers as well. And that's all I have for you this afternoon. I want to say thank you for joining me. And I'll stick around a little bit, but otherwise, I think this is a wrap on The Walking Dead, which, by the way, the play on that, if you are a Walking Dead fan, I was doing my studious research, and one of the things that they said is, contrary to popular belief, the title of the series does not only refer to the actual zombies. The title mostly refers to the group of survivors as they are walking around but are as good as dead. And I like to think that The Walking Dead refers to both officers and those who are future officers. We are all good as led, meaning we are all leaders, and we can lead and can be led, and both are equally important. And so The Walking Dead, assembling the group of chapter roles. I'm seeing these things come in. Brian was laughter. I think we're good. So Brian, if you want to stop recording, I think we're good.